be recorded, but we'll do it anyway. All right, so this morning we are going to go over some nested iterations, or nested iteration. What we're going to cover today, y'all have seen before. I just want to give us some more like concentrated practice time on this concept because it will be very important in your football project. So I am going to start off with a little bit of a warm up. I'm going to drop, actually, let me just share my screen so you can see what we're doing. Cool, so in the code help channel, I started a nested iteration thread and I'm gonna drop a warm up part 1 in here, if I can get this to send. So I'd like you to take about, let's take about 5 minutes individually and work through this warm up part 1, and then we'll do a warm up part 2 in about 5 minutes. So this is in the 2107 code help channel. Take 5 minutes. I will drop the next warm up at 9:09. All right, 5 minutes is a long time. How are we doing? Are we like getting finished? Do we need a little bit more time? Very few interactions. I'm gonna take that as we're done. All right, cool. I'm gonna drop the second part of the warm-up that I'd like you to work on. And I think we'll take another like 5-ish minutes on this. And on this one, when you are finished and willing to share your screen and share some code, give me a green check on this message. Okay, so when you're finished and you're willing to share some code, give me a green check mark. And then when in about 5 minutes, we'll do a little bit of share out. And you are muted if you are trying to speak.
I wasn't trying to say anything yet, but
okay.
What should I say?
I'd love for you to walk us through what you did for that second part of the warm-up.
So I originally thought like, there's nothing else I'm going to do that benefits from these being continued to be nested. So I just assigned a variable and flattened it so that I could call those later. And then for the length, I literally copied the method I used above and I just changed the variable. And then for the hash, I used the inject method and just assigned for every animal that was the key, and the animal's length was the value, and then called the hash again, so that would be returned. And that was it.
Okay, cool. I like it. Very creative reading of the instructions.
What did I do wrong?
So for that first one, what enumerable might you use to create an unnested array? And I'm going to furiously do some Googling because I'm pretty sure that flatten is not an enumerable, but maybe it is. Ruby, docs, enumerables. Let's see. Yeah, no.
Okay.
Flatten is very, very interesting, but not quite an enumerable.
Okay.
I like it though. I like the use of find all and the inject for the other two. Let's go to, I think Weston also volunteered. Weston, do you want to go ahead and share what you put together?
All right, so first things first, I want to apologize. I did pry because it's easier for me to think and work with, but it makes it a little bit more difficult to read. So first things first, here we have the nested animals nested array. And then I just, I arbitrarily decided to use a flat map on it. And then inside the flat map, I just mapped with array.map, so then now I'm working with the individual arrays. So I named that array. And then on that, I just wanted to do another map, which is animal. And then I just, changed the symbols to animals, because then I was working with the animal to string. So that worked.
Great, I like it.
And same thing with, the next one, except it was just animal.length, it's greater than 3, and I used find all there. And then for the hash, I created a new hash here. And then I just did an each, because each is super granular and easy to use if you don't know what the heck you're doing. And then so I did opened up the array again. And then on each of the arrays, I decided to add to the hash that I previously made the key as animal and the value as animal.length.
Great, awesome. I love this. I like that you're really clearly sort of working with this next nested structure to say, okay, first I'm going to iterate over the nested animals. And so each element is an array itself. You've called it array here, which I think is okay. I maybe would have called it animals, just so it's more clear, like this array is an array of animals. And so as you're iterating over the two arrays, inside each array, you're iterating over that subarray as well. So you're doing that nested iteration. And on this one line, it is, like you said, a little bit harder to read, but if you saw them broken out with like do and ends, you would have like a level of do and ends, and then inside, like nested, you would have another do end. So great job. Yeah, just like that, like what you're showing. Yeah, cool. I think I saw Tanner also with the green check. Tanner, did you want to share what you put together?
Sure. It looks mostly the same as what everybody else had done.
Cool.
Get that out of the way. So I did the same, just flat map 2S for that one. Same flat map, find all, length greater than or equal to 4. But for this one, I did it a little bit differently. I used a 2H method, which makes a hash out of, so if you have a nested array that's like the inner ones are 2 elements and you do 2H on the whole thing, it'll do that as the key and that as the value. So I just did that instead of like making a hash outside.
Cool. That also works. The one thing I would say on this is when you do that multi-line, let's use the do in the end instead of the opening and closing brackets.
Go.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all. You can go ahead and stop sharing, Tanner. Okay, cool. So what Matt, Weston, and Tanner just showed us is we can iterate inside of other iterations, which I think might be something that you all have come across or seen maybe in an independent challenge review before, but this is something you're gonna be doing a lot more in the football project. So we've got a little bit of an exercise that we're gonna work on. Let me drop a link to this repo in Slack. Why does my Slack keep going away? I do not know. All right, cool. So I just dropped a repo in that thread, and we're gonna be using this as basically just an exercise for pretty much the remainder of the time. One of the things that we as developers will often have to do is dive into new code and try and understand what's going on. So we're gonna do a little bit of practice on that as we do this exercise. So what I wanna do is take the first like 8-ish minutes or the next 8 minutes here and have you all individually sort of look through this repository and see if you can like kind of wrap your mind around what's going on with these classes and these tests. In these first 8 minutes, I don't want you to do any coding. I just want you to be sort of exploring and learning about this repo. Okay, learning about the methods and the classes that are in here. And then at about 9:30, we are gonna be breaking into some groups to work on this. I think what I wanna do is I'm gonna create some breakout rooms that you can choose to go into at first. So I'm gonna create 3, actually, I'm gonna create 2 breakout rooms at first. One of them will be if you wanna work on this exercise individually, silently, with no talking. The other will be if you want to work on this exercise individually, but maybe like chat with other folks as they are also working on it individually. And then if you'd like to be in a more collaborative group, we'll just stay in this in the main room, and then I'll create some more breakout rooms for anyone who wants to do that. So over the next now 7 minutes, be learning about this repo, deciding if you want to be like totally silent, individual, but some talking, or in like pairs, like I'll put you into pairs and I'll make the breakout rooms. And by 9:30, choose which one you want to go to, either choose one of the individual rooms or stay in here and we'll do some breakout rooms. Any questions on what I'm looking for? Okay, let me create these rooms. I'm going to title them. Okay, so I've opened 2 rooms, one for total silence, one for some talking. Those are both the individual work rooms. If you want to be paired with another student, stay in here. And at 9:30, we will kick off the next piece. Okay. All right, cool. So the last thing I want to do here is I just want to walk through this, this exercise kind of like independent challenge style. So I'll walk you through sort of how I would solve these problems and talk a little bit about my process. As with a lot of things in programming, when we're working with nested iteration and nested collections, having a really strong process can help you get further when you get stuck. So let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and make sure this is the right one. Look at my school spec. Yep. Okay, cool. Awesome. So if I take a look at the README, I'm going to follow these rules. I'm going to work through the course spec and then move on to the school spec and unskip and make tests pass as I go. And the rules that I'm going to follow, I'm not going to create any additional instance variables. This is a very important one. Not going to create any additional instance variables. I'm not going to change anything about the test except unskipping them. And I am not going to create any helper methods. I'm really going to focus my work on this nested iteration. So let's go to the course spec. And I just want to first run these just to make sure they are working. RSpec, course spec. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and unskip this first one. So our course should get all of the groups represented by its students. Great, undefined method, groups represented. So let me pull up my course over here, and I need a method for groups represented. All right, let's run our test again. Okay, cool. So I'm getting a value, which means my method is named appropriately and being run appropriately. It's just not giving me what I want. So one of the first things that I do when I'm working with collections, if I am tackling like a more difficult problem, is I'll try and figure out like where in this class is the information that I need. So looking at my test, I need to get these 2 symbols into an array. So I want to figure out inside my course, where is this data located? Where do these 2 symbols exist in this course? So I'm going to throw a pry in here. Let's see, I've already required pry, so I can just pry in. And this is the first part of my process, is I want to see where in this course are those 2 pieces of data. So I typically start by looking at myself, like what object am I right now and what kind of information does that object have? So right now I am a course. The object that this method is being run on is an instance of a course. And I've got a name, professor, and some students. And my students is an array of student objects. And each of those student objects has a group. And here is where those data points are. So again, my first step is to see if I can identify where in this object this data lives that I'm looking for. So it's in the student. So in order to get to these data points, I need to be able to grab an individual student. So I need to iterate over students to get to the point where I am looking at an individual student, because an individual student is what is holding on to that data point that I need. So I'm going to start with each, And I'm going to say, okay, at students that each do student. And I'm going to throw another pry in here. And I want to run this and see if I'm closer to that data point that I'm looking for. So now inside of this pry, I've got access to hopefully a single student. Great. I've named my block variable student. I have access to that single student, and I can ask a student for its group. Cool. So now I've isolated that one little data point that I'm looking for. One of these little data points. So now that I can grab that data, I can go ahead and shovel it into an array. I can throw an array in here, and I can shovel student.group into my array. And with each, I know I'm going to need to return that accumulator again. And this should work. Nope.
Groups.
Student dot, oh, yeah, groups with an S. Cool. Okay, I'm getting closer. So I've got snakes, lions, and lions. So I actually only want a unique list of this. So I'm just going to use the unique method. And there we go. Questions on how I got here or my process? Chloe.
I was just kind of wondering if it would be acceptable to do it without kind of setting an array in there, like using the enumerable collect.
Yeah, definitely. So each will always, well, I guess not always, when we're working with iterative problems, like I need to do something with each and every thing in this collection, each will always work. And you can also use enumerables like collect or map. And so now that I've got it working with each, I might refactor this to say, okay, this looks like a collect or map pattern. And so instead of, I'll leave this here, I'll just comment this out. Instead of using that accumulator, I could map or collect. Collect is the same. I just prefer map because it's fewer characters. I could map over students. And for each student, I want the student group. And map itself will give us that new array, or collect. It'll give us that new array. And so if I run this, I'm going to get that array that has all the students' groups, but I want that unique list. So I can just tag a unique onto the end of this and run it, and that looks fine. Or I could do something like this, where I set a variable equal to all groups, and then I ask for all groups dot unique at the end. And either way is fine. Did that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Erica.
I used group by and then I just called for the keys. Is that excessive or acceptable?
Ooh, I would say that's excessive. Yeah, I mean, it definitely can work, right? But probably a little excessive. Cool. Yeah, great question. Awesome. All right, let's take a look at the next one. So I'm going to go to our school spec, and oh geez, didn't want to just type a bunch of random stuff. I broke my rule of not changing the test. Here we go. I'm just going to run the school spec just to make sure that everything so far is still passing. Great, excellent. All right, so our first skipped test is that we can assign all students to groups at once. So this is a little bit of a funky method, but if I look back at my README and look at the school, so it says the group students method should assign a group to every student enrolled in a course or courses at that school. Okay, cool. So the method that we're working on, group students, essentially should assign a group to every student in the school. So let's go back to our school spec and let's run it. I should have an undefined method error. Great. So I need a method for group all students in my school. So let's open up that school class and let's group all students. All right, let's run it. I should be getting, yeah, some failures. Okay, cool. So let's take a look at these expectations. So, okay, so this array of students will be used only in this test to verify that after school.groupAllStudents, each student has a group. Okay, cool. So we're iterating over each of these students, and I'm expecting that that student group is included in the school's groups. So a school has groups. So when I group these students, it should be one of these 4 groups. And the student group should not be, the student group should not be nil. Okay, this feels like a little bit of overkill on the testing side, but that's fine. All right, so let's do it. So I need to group all students. And I've got this handy method above that will assign a group to an individual student. And so to group all students, I need to get at each individual student. So let me throw a pry in here and see if I can identify where those students live. So if I look at myself, I'm a school, I've got courses, and I see students in here. And right now, all of my students have a group of nil, okay? So to get to an individual student, I need to first get to an individual course. And that is, each individual course is in this courses array. So I'm gonna need to iterate over courses. And then within each course, I'm gonna need to iterate over students to get to a single student object. So again, here's my process. I want to identify like what is the data or what are the objects that I need to isolate? And then how am I going to get to those individual objects or individual data points? So I know I need an individual student because this is the object that I'm going to assign a group to. I need to isolate individual students. And so I need to figure out, how do I get to an individual student? I need to look at my courses, and each course I need to look at my students. Okay. So let's go ahead and start this process. So I'm going to say at courses that each do. And so this will be an individual course that I am iterating on. And I'm going to throw another pry in here and just continue verifying my assumptions. So as I go, I wanted one step closer to my goal. So now I have a course and I still see individual students, but I don't have a single student right now. Right now I have an array of students. So to get to that single student object, I need to ask the course to do something with each of its students. So course.students is this array. So I need to look at each of these students. So inside this each on my courses, I am going to course.students.each. I'm going to iterate over each course's student. And again, I just want to verify my assumptions. I think that this should be an individual student object, but let's double check. So if I look at what I called this block variable student, it is an individual student. And so now I can reassign this individual student's group. I want to talk about naming real quick. Ruby doesn't really care what we name these block variables, but it can be helpful for us as humans to name them what they are, to give them a name that represents the thing that they are. So as I iterate over an array of courses, I could call each of these courses muffin. And that means that it's not a muffin, or it's not a course that has students. It's this variable muffin. And then as I iterate over students, I could call each student a unicorn. And then if I run my pry again, exit, it's not a student that I have access to. It's a unicorn because I've called this block variable unicorn. And it's not a course that I have access to. It's a muffin because I've called this block variable that is representing an individual course. I've called it muffin. Okay, so just a note on naming. Ruby doesn't care what we call these block variables, but we as humans should care. And so it's generally the best practice to name your block variable what it is representing. As I iterate over every single course, this block variable, which is representing every element in the collection, is going to be a single course. And then as I iterate over students, this block variable that represents a single element as it's being iterated on is a student. So being really clear with what you're naming these things is going to be really helpful, particularly in that football project, where sometimes things aren't like clearly defined as like a student object, a course object. Sometimes you will have like some pretty funky things. Name them as descriptively as possible. All right, cool. So what do I want to do with each student? I want to assign that student to a group. So I'm going to use this method, assign to group, and send it this student that I am iterating over. And let's run the test. Cool. That passes. Question for you all. I've done this with each. Is there an enumerable that might be better? What do y'all think? Is there an enumerable that might be better? Erica.
I feel like in this case, because we have the assign to group method above that we can just use, each is actually the simplest thing we can do here.
Yeah, I like it. I agree with that. In this case, each is really the simplest and only thing we need to do. Because this method is really responsible for like doing a thing, it is a commanding method. It's a command type method. It does something. That's its main responsibility. I don't really care what this method returns. We could have this method return like, yay, I did it. I don't care. I only care that this method did the thing or made the change that it was intended to make. If I use an enumerable, that's usually indicating that I care about the return value of that iteration, right? I don't really care what the return value is. I just want it to do a thing to every single student. Great, let's go Ryan and then Chloe.
Don't you need a if statement inside the course students.each loop because there are the same students in different courses?
Yeah, so technically this might reassign a student that was previously assigned while this method was run. I could say like if the student group is nil, assign it. Because I'm assigning all students all at once, and that assignment is random, I don't really care if someone like is assigned and then gets randomly reassigned. But if I did care, you're totally right. I could say like if student dot group is nil question mark, then assign that student. Otherwise, do nothing. And this will still work. Cool. Chloe, did you have this? Was your comment the same?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that too.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, in this case, it doesn't really matter, but could matter for other things. Like if you're charging a student tuition or something, maybe you wouldn't want to double charge them. Maybe. All right, cool. Any other questions on this grouping all students, or how I identified like how to get to this individual student object? All right, cool. So our next one is listing all students by name. So let's go ahead and run this test. I should have an undefined method. Great. So let's go ahead and say names. And I should have, yep, a failure. Excellent. So again, I'm going to pry in here and I want to identify like where are these strings? Where do these strings live inside of my school object? So let's go ahead and hit this pry. Again, I'm going to look at myself and see like what do I have access to? And I'm just going to try and find these strings. So here we've got some strings that look like what I'm looking for. Yep, great. So these strings are individual student names. So again, I need to isolate single students. And so I've done that above. So I kind of know how to get there at this point. I need to iterate over courses, and within each course, iterate over students so that I have access to a single student object. And I'm going to be trying to collect or return all of their names. So again, I'm going to start with each, and we might refactor in a bit. So let's say names is going to be equal to an empty array. And I'm going to iterate over courses. And within each course, I want to iterate over that course's students. This is a student. And let me throw a pry in here, just double check that I am on the, oops, double check that I am looking at the object I think I am. Okay, so let's just verify that I'm looking at a single student. I am, great. So I can ask for that student's name, excellent. So now I can start shoveling those names into my names array, student.name. And let's run this. All right, cool, failure. Oh, yep. So I'm expecting an array of strings, and I'm getting an array of courses because each returns the original array or the original collection. So I need to return my names at the end. And let's run it. I think we should be a little closer. Great. So I'm getting an array of strings, which is much better than an array of courses, but I've got too many names. I've got some duplicates. So we need a unique list of these names. So I'm just going to call .unique on the end of this. And that looks good. Any questions on this so far? All right. What enumerables could I use instead of each? What enumerables might be helpful here? Weston.
I used a flat map and map.
So.
Flat map and map, I like it. And did you flat map on courses or did you flat map on students?
Courses.
Courses, cool. So I think that is the right answer. I want to kind of step into it a little bit. So here's what I see students do often is they know that this is sort of the map pattern. When I'm shoveling this thing into a new array, this sort of indicates the map pattern. And so I'll often see students do this, where they're mapping over the student and asking for the student name. And so they'll do this and they'll run it and they'll get like this empty array. They might see that and say, oh, actually, I guess I don't really need names, or this if we're using map. And so now they'll get like an array of courses. And so here's what I see students do, which I want you all to pay attention to so that you don't have to make this mistake over and over again. Maybe you'll only make it like twice. So often I see students when they throw a map in here and it doesn't work initially, what they'll do is they'll do this. Okay, maybe find all's the enumerable I want. Nope. Okay, maybe it's select. Nope. Okay. So often when folks are just learning about like this nested iteration, they'll get really focused on this enumerable and kind of forget about the outer enumerable. So I like this idea of mapping. This is definitely correct. Anytime you go from using each to using an enumerable, maybe not anytime, I'm going to say 99% of the time when you go from using each to using an enumerable, you need not only one enumerable, but two enumerables. You typically use either two enumerables or two eaches. Hardly ever will you see, like I'm going to say I've never done this in real life. So you're either going to use two enumerables or two eaches, or I guess I could say you're either going to use all enumerables or all eaches. It's just a general rule of thumb. Okay, cool. So for each array of students, I want an array of their names. And for each course, I want whatever this array of student names is. So I'm going to start with a map here. So I'm going to map over each student. So this will return an array of student names for each course. And this will return an array of student names, one for each course. So let's go ahead and run this and see what this looks like. Okay, cool. So we can see I expected a single array, and now I'm getting an array of arrays, but the subarrays that I'm looking for are the things that I want. So that's good. Here's the other thing I see students do a lot is they'll do like the map on the outside, but then on the inside, they'll leave the each. And yeah, we'll just run it and we can see what's happening here. So with the map on the outside, they are getting arrays of student objects, but not the name, because on the inside, this each is just returning that same student's array. So again, just like being super clear, if we're using enumerables, we generally use two enumerables or as many enumerables as there are nests in our iteration. Okay, cool. So we're mapping and we're mapping and we're getting a nested collection. So here's where I've got a decision that I can make. I can either decide to flatten after I'm finished with all my iteration, and this will give us a single array. Now there's other stuff going on, but this will at least give us a single array. Or I can use flat map And as Weston said, the appropriate place to use flat map is at the same level of iteration where you would tag a flatten at the end. So since I'm flattening the result of this course map, this is where I will put the flat map. So I can run this. And again, I get some duplicates. So I would probably just say I want the unique list of this. Right. Questions on this? No questions? Everyone feels super comfortable with this? All right, let's go to the last one. So now we need to return all students by group. So I'm trying to build this hash here, fun. So let's run this test, and I should have an undefined method. Great, I do. Students by group. Run it again, I should have a failure. Okay, great. So I'm going to throw my pry in here. And again, I'm going to try and identify where are the pieces of data that I need. And in this case, I need kind of a lot of data. I need the group names as symbols, and I need student objects. Okay, so I need group names as symbols, and I need student objects. So let's go ahead and hit this pry. So myself, this school, I've got some courses, and each course has a student, and each student has a group. Okay. I also have this instance variable of all of my groups. So there's kind of two instance variables that might be useful here. My courses, which has students, and each student has their group. And this groups, which is just the symbols of just the groups that are in this school. So I've got two different options here. I could sort of combine groups and courses and get all the information that I need. Or I can just use my courses array, because courses has all the information I need. It's got the groups and it's got the students. It's got the groups through the student. So I'm going to focus on the courses array because it has all the information that I need, versus the groups array, which only has a part of the information that I need. If I have two different options in terms of like, okay, this has some data, this has some data, I want to choose the thing that has the most data, the most applicable information. And in this case, that's my courses. Any questions on how I'm making that determination? Okay. Courses has all the data that I need inside of it through its students. So that's what I'm going to use. Ah! Oh, goodness. There we go. Let's just exit out of that. All right, cool. So I've identified where the data is. The next piece of my process is when I am building up any sort of hash, I will typically focus on the keys first and then start filling in the values once I know that I can get my keys created appropriately. So I'm really going to focus on getting to each of these groups first. So let's go ahead and I'm going to create an accumulator. I'm just going to call it students by group. And it's going to be a hash. And yeah, let's go ahead and use each. So for each course, courses.each do. I again want to get to a single student because it's the student that has this, this group on it. So I want to say course.students.each do each student. And then let's throw a pry in here and just, oops, that's not what I wanted. And again, just really challenge my assumption, make sure I'm looking at a single student object. Okay, cool. And so now I can get to a group by asking that student for its group. And I have this students by group hash. So I can start creating keys in the students by group hash by giving it a key of student.group. And I'm just going to give it like some value. I'm going to give it an empty array just because eventually I am going to want some arrays in here. And then let's see if that gave me sort of what I want. Students by group. Okay, cool. So I'm starting to build up my keys. So I'm just going to grab this and let's throw this in here. And I'm going to throw a pry at the end of my iteration and see where I'm at with this hash, see if I'm getting close to what I need for the keys. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so if I look at my students by group, I'm hoping that I have a hash with the 4 keys that I'm looking for, and I do. So I've got my key set up. Now I can focus on the values that I need. Questions so far? Yeah, Caitlin.
Why did you set the student.group to an array again?
Yeah, so I set it to this array just because let me just rephrase this. What I could have set this to is like TBD, like I'll figure out this value later. I'm really focusing on making sure I get the 4 keys that I'm looking for first.
Okay.
And then the next step in my process is going to be to figure out how to actually set up these values. So if I run this and look at my students by group, I'm really trying to focus on like, can I get the keys that I need? And because of the way that hashes work, there can't be a key with no value. So I need to give it some like throwaway value, some like placeholder value that I can reset now that I've got the keys.
Thank you.
Great question. All right, cool. So actually in this pry, I can start working through this. No, actually, I think I want to set up a pry above here. Pry. All right, cool. So let's see. So let's start thinking about what I want this value to be. So I'm iterating over courses and iterating over students. I've already learned through some of my previous tests that I might have duplicate students. So I'm going to need to do some checking here on my existing hash. So at the first iteration point, students by group, I can do like a similar thing here where I can say, okay, I want my students by group for that particular group. I want the value to be, I know I want it to be an array, and it's going to be an array of students, and I have access to this student object here. So what if I just make it an array of this student? Let's see what that gives me. Okay, so I've got a key with a value that's an array, and that array has a student in it. So that's closer to what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and replace this TBD bit with what I just did. So let's put the student in here. And I'm going to leave my pry in here, and I want to kind of see what happens as I iterate, see if it's doing what I want it to do. So let's go ahead and let's exit. And we can run this. So the first time, my students by group should be an empty hash. If I exit to continue and look at my students by group, I should have one student in there. I want to exit and see again, like what it looks like at the next point. Okay, now I've got 2 keys. Let's go ahead and exit and see what happens next. Okay, so now I've got 2 keys again, but my Lions group has a different student in its array. So if I scroll up at the previous iteration, the student that was in my Lions group was Ron. And now the student that's in my Lions group is Harry. So if I look at my expectation or at my test, I really want to start building up this hash with multiples, or excuse me, this array with multiple students. And what I'm doing here is I'm reassigning the value at this key for each student. So what I actually want to do is I want to say, I want to see like if that, let's see, what do I want to do here? So I'm going to see if that key is already exists, meaning like I've already set up a key with a starting value. So like, yeah, so if the students by group at this key of the student group, actually I'm gonna do this a little bit opposite of what I just said. Let's say if it does not exist, if the value at that key is nil, then I can set up this, first student in the array. Otherwise, if the key is not nil, meaning I've already set it up, I can students by group for this student.group, I can shovel in the student. So I'm going to check to see if that key does not yet exist. I need to create the key and a starting value. Otherwise, I should be able to shovel the student into the array that I had created at some previous iteration. So if that key doesn't exist, go ahead and set up a starting value for it. Otherwise, assume that it's already an array and we can shovel that student in. Let's check it out. Let's exit and let's run this. Okay, so I'm hitting this pry at the very end of my iteration. So if I look at my students by group, now I've got, let's see, snakes, that looks good. It's got 1 student in it. Lions has 4 students, fun. Eagles, 3 students. So I'm getting some duplicate students in here, which is fine. So I think what I want to do at this point is, after I'm done shoveling students in, I think the most straightforward thing to do is to say, okay, let's make sure that students by group, let's make sure the value at this key is unique. And let's exit and run this again. I'm not sure if that unique is actually going to hold. Students by group. No. Oh. So here's the rare moment that I might use a bang on the end of something to say, actually, yeah, I might use a bang on the end of this to say, like, I want this to actually change this value into the unique value. Let's run it. I think this is going to work. Students by group. Okay, cool. So that works. I don't know that I love this now that I've done it. So I might say, Weston, do you have a thought?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering about the bang. I've never come across that before. Like, can you just explain like how general purpose it is?
Yeah, so when you have a bang operator on the end of something, it's as if you're saying, I want the students by group for this student dot group to be equal to this. So these two lines are equivalent. They're doing the same thing. So I could reassign the value at this key to be the unique list of students like this. Or I could just say with this bang operator, like, I want you to destroy, or like not destroy. In my head, I think destroy, but I want you to change this value permanently. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, because I
Kind of.
was assuming that the just dot unique without the bang was already doing that.
Yeah. So this just returns a unique list. It doesn't change the list itself. So because I need to change that list and have it persist in its changed form in the hash, I need to either reset the value to the unique list by either like resetting it with this assignment operator, or I can reset that value with the bang operator.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I tend to not use the bang too much, so I'm going to show another way of doing this. But first, let's go to Rowan and then Ted.
I was just going to give an idea for how to do it without using the unique with the bang, but
great.
If you were going to show it anyway, that's fine.
Okay. Ted, did you have a question?
I'm confused why you have to reassign like the keys, why you have to do that, why you can't just tack on the dot unique at the end.
I see. Yeah, so if I didn't do that, the problem becomes like what do I want to unique? I don't want to unique students by group dot unique, because unique is going to operate on whatever collection I'm calling it on. So in fact, I don't even know if it'll let me unique a hash, because a hash by its, oh, it did. That's interesting. So students by group is the hash. And so what unique will do is it will make sure that everything in that hash, or it will return all of the unique key value pairs in that hash, which in a hash, a key is always unique, which means that it will only ever have unique key value pairs. So it's not the hash that I want to unique, it's each of these sub arrays. And so that is why I want to reassign the value of each of these keys after I shovel students in. So after I shovel the students in, I want to make sure, whoops, students by group, at this key, the array that's at this key is unique.
Why?
So,
oh,
go ahead.
Because like in my mind, I feel like you'd want to make the students unique. That wouldn't make any sense, actually.
And I have to do this because students can exist in more than one course. So as I'm iterating over courses and students, I might see the same student multiple times. So let me show the other way of doing this that might make a little bit more sense or might help clarify things.
Okay.
So when I come across a student group that doesn't exist, I can assume that I have not seen that student before. But when I'm shoveling in students after that, this student that I'm trying to shovel in might already exist in this array. I might have already iterated over that student. and shoveled them into that array. So to avoid shoveling the same student twice, I can say, let's see, else, this is going to get a little bit messy. I can say else if the students by group for this student group include, if it does not include the student already, go ahead and shovel that student in. Tabs. So the first time I see this group, go ahead and create the starter array with that student in it. Otherwise, if that student is not already in the array for that key, go ahead and shovel that student in. So this will maintain that uniqueness. So if I go to students by group, now if I run this, I think we're there. Yep. This is a pretty spicy challenge. Okay. I am not going to go any further into this, but what I will do is I'll drop this method into our 2107 code help thread, and you all can play around with it. And I would encourage you to play around with it and really use pry to like see, okay, what is happening at every point? As I iterate through, how is my students by group changing? Are there other ways that I could do this? There definitely are, but this is like the most sort of explicit way to do it, maybe. Let's go Rowan and then Michael.
Is there a reason you didn't change the else to just be an else if?
No. I think this will still work. Yeah. Because I wasn't thinking clearly. Michael.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I basically had the same solution as this one, except I used an unless. Like, are we avoiding unless?
I'm not avoiding it necessarily. It's just not the word that my brain typically goes to.
Okay.
Okay, Ryan, and then we've got to close out.
Is it like when you're dealing with data and you said like courses was the better option to run through, I did inject on groups. It ended up working, but I was wondering if, does it specifically need to be focused on the course data rather than use groups and the course data?
It doesn't need to be, but I used it because courses has all the information that I need. But yeah, it doesn't need to be. There's lots of ways that you can get to a solution here. Cool. All right, that is it for this morning. I will drop this method into Slack so you can play around with it. Have a great afternoon. There will be an attendance thread at 1, so keep an eye out for that, but otherwise it is project work time today.